Ron DeSantis is still going very strong on good policy in Florida, passing yet another bill that I completely agree with. In other news, there is an illegal Venezuelan national here in the States who is on the run because he was essentially in a program and then he decided not to follow the rules of that program. What's interesting about him, though, is he is encouraging other illegals to squat in American homes and teaching them how to break the law. I'm pretty sure this is illegal for multiple reasons. And last but not least, we have a request from one of my friends. We're going to be talking about multiple conflicts going on in Africa, the root cause, and the impact of these conflicts. All of that and more today. Welcome back to Free Speech. Welcome back to the show. Let's just go ahead and get right into it, shall we? So first thing on the agenda today. Ron DeSantis has passed yet another bill that I almost completely agree with. And of course, the left is outraged about this. Let's go ahead and talk about what the policy is. According to the Florida governor's website in 2024, quote, Governor Ron DeSantis signed House Bill 3, which prohibits children under the age of 14 from becoming social media account holders and allows 14 and 15-year-olds to become account holders with parental consent. Social media harms children in a variety of ways, said Governor DeSantis. House Bill 3 gives parents a greater ability to protect their children. The internet has become a dark alley for our children where predators target them and dangerous social media leads to higher rates of depression, self-harm, and even suicide, said House Speaker Paul Renner. I am proud of the work of all of our bill sponsors for delivering a legislative framework that prioritizes keeping children safe. Thanks to Governor DeSantis' signature, Florida leads the way in protecting children online as states across the country fight to address these dangers. End quote. Admittedly, I don't see any problems with this bill. I know there are going to be some people that are like, well, it's their right to have a social media account if they want to. Honestly, the way that I think about it, is it your right to harm yourself? In a case, yes. But as a minor, are there certain provisions that can be established that keep you from doing so? Also, yes. I agree with this bill. I think that it's a good thing to keep children off of social media, especially up to the age of 15. I think that there's potential to be extended on that, actually, but that's a topic for another day. There's tons of evidence. There's research showing that it forms addictive habits, that it leads to mental illness, and so many other disadvantages. So why do we keep letting kids get hooked on this stuff at very young ages when their brains are still developing and will form these habits forever? It doesn't make sense, and this bill does a good job of addressing the harm. Specifically, this bill prevents a minor who is younger than 14 years of age from becoming a social media account holder, empowers parents to decide whether 14 and 15-year-olds can have a social media account, protects the ability of Floridians to remain anonymous online, and in addition to protecting children from the dangers of social media, this bill also requires pornographic or explicit websites to use age verification to prevent minors from accessing sites that are, well, wildly inappropriate for children. I don't think that there's really anything wrong with this bill. I've said it before and I'll say it again. A lot of times policy gets passed, I read the bill and I'm like, what are we coming to as a society? But this is one of those bills where I'm like, it addresses a legitimate harm. It has an easy, simple fix to that harm and actually solves it. This is by all means a good policy. But don't just take my word for it. Let's get an additional opinion on the bill. According to Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire, quote, legislation was just signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis. It hasn't gotten much attention, but it should, because it addresses the legitimate concerns about apps like TikTok without granting the government any kind of sweeping new unprecedented power to regulate the lives of American citizens. Instead, it regulates the behavior of children in a manner that's consistent with all sorts of other regulations that already apply to minors. Generally speaking, under this bill, children under the age of 14 can't have social media accounts, and 14 and 15-year-olds will need permission from their parents to have them. It's focused on banning apps that have particular features which are designed to keep children on the app at all times. In order to fall under this ban, according to the text of the legislation, the app must have one of the following addictive features, which are A, infinite scrolling, B, push notifications or alerts, or C, autoplay or video that begins to play without the user first clicking on the video or a play button for the video. The point of the law isn't to ban content per se. It's to regulate how much of it is being exposed to children. There's a lot of evidence that these addictive features rewire the brains of children. The journal World Psychiatry recently published an analysis which found that the primary hypothesis on how the internet affects our attentional capacities is through hyperlinks, notifications, and prompts, providing a limitless stream of digital forms of digital media, thus encouraging us to interact with multiple inputs simultaneously. These are the kind of notifications that are specifically banned in the Florida bill. And there's more research along these lines. Researchers at UNC for example, found that checking social media repeatedly among young teens ages 12 to 13 may be associated with changes in how their brains develop over this 3-year period. In their analysis, which was published in JAMA Pediatrics, the UNC researchers specifically determined that the brains of adolescents who checked social media often, more than 15 times per day, became more sensitive to social feedback. End quote. What can we see here? There's obviously a legitimate harm with social media. I don't even use any social media websites, but I've started implementing a few things since last summer that have made me a way more productive person. Last summer, I attended Patriot Academy and heard a speech all about making the best use of your time. We really only have so much of it. We can't afford to waste it doing pointless things on screens. So, I've been notification free except for phone calls for almost a year now. Honestly, I would encourage everyone to try it unless your job means that it's absolutely crucial that you get text messages. I would encourage everyone to try it. Reason being, I have found that it does make me a lot more productive. I'm not glued to a device, I'm not glued to a screen, and I'm not constantly checking for notifications. If I get one, I'll respond to it at some point. But if someone really needs me that bad, they're not going to text me, they're going to call me. It's a good thing to implement for sure, just like this policy in Florida. Ultimately, I think that this is a good bill. Keep it up, Ron DeSantis. While that policy may be a good thing and totally legal, the next thing that we're going to be talking about is the exact opposite. I'm pretty sure this next thing is illegal for multiple reasons. Now, let's get to the point. What is this? According to the New York Post in 2024, Venezuelan national Leonel Moreno crossed the southern border illegally in April 2022 at Eagle Pass, Texas, and was enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program, which allows federal authorities to track migrants using ankle monitors or other technology. However, Moreno didn't follow the rules and is now listed as an absconder from the program, according to internal Immigration and Customs Enforcement documents. Moreno, who claims in his videos that he, his wife, and daughter receive $350 a week from the federal government, appears to be hiding in plain sight, even posting videos in front of a police car. We have witnessed yet another individual who was allowed entry into the U.S. under the ATD program, only to make TikTok videos explaining how to break the law. The question stands, how many thousands more are out there unaccounted for after fleeing this program? Said a former ICE field office director. Moreno has become a TikTok influencer, encouraging fellow Venezuelans to squat in the homes of U.S. citizens, and calling President Biden mi papa. Yeah, this is as ridiculous as it sounds. I don't like to work, he tells followers. In the U.S., there are a million tricks, a million things to do, he says as he outlines how to live effectively for free in a new country. I've concluded that the American dream is real, he said in a separate post, adding that he has lived for more than a year in the U.S. and never had to work. The Venezuelan migrant also instructs followers how to carry out scams. He also told them to pretend they're injured to make a leg cast with plastic and Velcro. Work is for slaves, boys. Remember that work is for slaves. End quote. This is insane. Immigration under Biden really is something, isn't it? This man is coming into the U.S. illegally, getting on a program that essentially is there just to put a band-aid over this problem, breaking the rules of the program, and actively going online telling people how to break the law. Is this really what we have come to as a nation? You know, at some point, we would have seen something like this and everybody would have been like, that was illegal. You can't do that. But no. Now, he has thousands of followers on social media, instructs them how to break the law, and no one is doing anything about it. Yes, internal customs enforcement has been trying to apprehend this man, But he's been out here doing this, as he said, for over a year. He's been living in the US for over a year and hasn't had to work at all. Because of this, once again, he says, yeah, the American dream is real. It is. The American dream is real. You can come here from anywhere in the world. You can work hard and you can make a name for yourself. There are so many nations where you just can't do that. Socialist nations, communist nations, you name it. You can't do these kinds of things there. Because there, no matter how hard you work, you won't amount to anything. The American dream is coming here, working hard, and making a name for yourself. You can accomplish things here. Even though our system of government is run by a bunch of people who don't know how to use it, we have the best form of government in the world. The United States government is the only form of government that hasn't had to change forms since inception. That says something about our nation. I still think that it's the best form of government in the world, even if it's run by people that don't really know how to use it. But like I've said before, we have the power to change that. All you gotta do your research, be informed, get out and vote. And hopefully we get someone into office in the next term that doesn't just let these kinds of things slide. The last thing that we're going to be talking about today was actually requested by a friend of mine. I didn't even know that a lot of this was happening until he told me about it. So that just speaks to the fact that this is a major issue that we're not hearing about. There are two major conflicts in Africa right now, and I think that they both stem from the same thing. These two conflicts are an ISIS presence and a civil war. They're both serious issues, but our federal government and mainstream media are too busy telling us about Ukraine and Russia to let us know what's actually going on in any other parts of the world. So, because they're not going to do it, I'll do it for you. First up, the government has been shaky. This is what I believe is the root cause of both of these issues. Now, let me get into a little bit more detail of what I mean here. According to the Voice of America in 2024, a recent rise in the overthrow of governments on the African continent prompts a closer look at this phenomenon. The continent saw a significant increase in coups the last 3 years, with military figures carrying out takeovers in multiple different countries. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of an epidemic of coups after Sudan's in October of 2021. He described it as an environment in which some military leaders feel they have total impunity and can do whatever they want because nothing will happen to them. The latest power grabs in Africa have raised concerns that the region could be backsliding from its progress towards democracy. Of 492 attempted or successful coups carried out around the world since 1950, Africa has seen 220, the most of any region, with 109 of them successful. Out of 54 continents on the African continent, 45 have had at least one coup attempt since 1950. This government in this continent is so shaky. If there have been this many coups in this relatively short period of time, obviously it's not going to be able to withstand any kind of threats, domestic or foreign. Because this government is so shaky, it's led to these problems that I'm about to tell you about. The first of which is a major ISIS presence. According to the Counterterrorism Guide in 2022, one of ISIS's largest and most powerful regional branches, ISIS West Africa, controls broad swaths of territory and has killed or displaced thousands of people in Nigeria and neighboring countries. It formed in 2015 when ISIS publicly accepted a pledge of allegiance from the Nigeria-based terrorist group Boko Haram, establishing it as ISIS West Africa. They reject national borders and seek to discredit regional governments and eventually replace them with an ISIS-style state. It also fights against Boko Haram, which was revived in mid-2016 when some of its fighters separated from ISIS. The group promotes sectarian violence and exploits poor economic conditions and social divisions to attract members. It receives funding from ISIS core and local revenue sources, including kidnappings for ransom, taxation, and extortion. The members of this group, there are between 4,000 and 5,000 fighters. Bear in mind, this data is from a couple of years ago. I don't know if this is increased or decreased from then. This is the most recent that I could find. Now, their tactics and targets. ISIS West Africa employs ambushes, military-style assaults, roadside bombs, kidnappings, and targeted killings. This group focuses most of its attacks on regional military targets and civilian defense forces, but also frequently attacks government personnel and infrastructure, foreign aid workers, Christians, and other civilians whom it perceives are working against the group or opposing its interpretation of Islamic law. As you can see, this is a significant issue. If you've ever watched any war movies, you know the kinds of things that terrorist organizations do. Even if you haven't watched war movies, you've probably at least heard about these kinds of things. This is worse than what's going on in the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, but we're not hearing about it. Why are we not hearing about this? But we can't go a day without hearing "I stand for Ukraine" from the federal government. Because this doesn't work to serve their narrative. This last block of evidence just said it. They go after Christians and anyone else who they perceive are working against their interpretation of Islamic law. Why do you think that the federal government won't tell us about this terrorist organization and this presence? Because it works against their narrative. It's absolutely sick that we don't get any kind of actual journalism on any other foreign issues if they don't serve the government's mainstream narrative. It's ridiculous. I didn't even know that this was happening again until my friend recommended that I do this segment. It's insane how many things go on in our world that we just don't know about, just because they're not mainstream. This is why, once again, I would encourage everyone to try to be as informed as possible, because you never know when these kinds of things could happen to our nation, and we need to know at least what to expect or how to deal with it. The impact of this is from the National Security Information in 2017. A second major question is whether African states are strong enough to resist ISIS influence, irrespective of how local populations view the organization or its ideology. Vulnerability to insurgent activity will depend in part on the strength, stability, and legitimacy of the state. All else equal, the weaker the state, the more likely it is to enable ISIS to carve out safe havens for operations. Because of the state of the government in Africa, which I talked about a few minutes ago, ISIS hasn't exactly had a hard time maintaining this takeover. Because the government is so shaky, many of these states are weakened. Because the states are weakened, they haven't been able to defend themselves adequately against this terrorist presence. But that's not the only conflict that's going on this continent right now. The next of these is a conflict in Ethiopia. According to the Council on Foreign Relations in 2024, in the aftermath of the war between the Ethiopian central government and the northernmost region of Tigray, Ethiopia is once again engaged in violent internal conflict. Conflict began to emerge in the two regions in the spring of 2021, coinciding with the escalation of a war. During this war, multiple groups largely allied with the central government, and certain groups sided with the Tigrayans. In the aftermath of the war, the central government announced a crackdown on the operations of regional security forces. In an effort to consolidate central military control and respond to violence in the two regions, the Ethiopian government is fighting former allies and enemies alike. Between 2020 and 2022, they fought a war with militants from the northernmost region of Tigray, under the control of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. The conflict was one of the deadliest in recent world history and drew international attention for alleged war crimes, human rights abuses, and cleansing in Tigray. The war formally ended in November of 2022. The country was left in ruins, and its capital was turned over to the federal government. The conflict contributed to and coincided with worsening conditions throughout Ethiopia. What's the impact of this? Why am I telling you about all of these things that are going on in a foreign country? Well, the impact of this is exactly why we need to maintain union in the United States of America. What's going on in Africa is terrible, and it seems to serve as an eerie warning of what happens to a divided nation. The government there is in shambles. As a result of this, it is a weakened nation as of now. Because of this, they have terrorist organizations with a pretty big presence and civil wars. Think about this. Our government is not exactly in its top condition right now. We're divided on multiple issues, and it seems like the media tries to polarize us on these even more every single day. We can see right here an example of what happens when a nation is divided. Like Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And it's for these reasons that I believe that we need to maintain, obviously, we need to maintain being United States. We're the United States of America. We should not be the divided states of what the mainstream media wants us all to believe about each other. Honestly, though, I don't know if there's any way to completely remedy the division that's going on in our nation right now. But I think that one big solution is to just be informed. If you know the facts, you're less easy to control. If you're less easy to control, you won't fall for as many of the media narratives that are dividing our nation so much. I think the theme of this entire episode is just be informed. Be informed, do your research, and practice critical thinking. If they can't get to you, they can't control you. If they can't control you, they can't divide us anymore. So, have courage, do your research, be informed. Thank you for watching this episode of Free Speech with Lila Cortez. If you liked what you saw and heard, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and like this video. If you want to listen to the audio version of the podcast, head on over to Spotify. It's also just called Free Speech with Lila Cortez. Have a great day, be blessed, see you soon.